When you think about the most dangerous rebels in Targaryen history, two names immediately come to mind, and interestingly, they share the same first name. Daemon Blackfyre and Daemon Targaryen, both legendary figures who challenged the established order, both warriors of extraordinary skill, and both men who left the Seven Kingdoms drenched in blood. But here's the question that's been burning in the minds of fans for years: which of these two demons was actually more dangerous? Which one posed a greater threat to the realm? Today, we're going to dive deep into the lives, the rebellions, and the legacies of these two formidable princes to determine once and for all who truly deserves the title of Westeros' most dangerous rebel. Before we begin comparing these two legendary figures, we need to understand who they were and what made them so formidable. Let's start with the earlier of the two, Daemon Blackfyre. Born as Daemon Waters around 170 AC, this man was the bastard son of King Aegon IV Targaryen, known to history as Aegon the Unworthy and Princess Daena Targaryen. Now, being a bastard in Westeros usually means you're destined for a life in the shadows, but Daemon was no ordinary bastard. He was Targaryen on both sides, which gave him all the classic Valyrian features: the silver hair, the purple eyes, the kind of looks that made people stop and stare. But more importantly, he had something that set him apart from every other bastard in the realm. He had his father's favor. When Daemon was just 12 years old, King Aegon IV did something unprecedented. He knighted the boy and gave him Blackfyre, the ancestral Valyrian steel sword of House Targaryen, the very blade that Aegon the Conqueror had wielded. This wasn't just a gift, it was a statement. In Westerosi culture, swords carry immense symbolic weight, and Blackfyre was the sword of kings. By giving it to his bastard son instead of his legitimate heir, Daeron, Aegon was essentially saying, "This is the son I favor, this is the son I believe deserves to rule." From that moment forward, people began to look at Daemon differently, and he took the sword's name for his own, founding House Blackfyre with a reverse Targaryen sigil, a black three-headed dragon on a red field instead of red on black. Daemon Blackfyre grew up to become exactly what his supporters hoped he would be: a warrior without equal. Contemporary accounts describe him as tall, powerful, with broad shoulders and a flat, hard stomach. When he fought, it was like watching a god among men. With sword, lance, or flail, he could best any knight. But with Blackfyre in his hands, he was absolutely unstoppable. People compared him favorably to legendary warriors like Aemon the Dragon Knight, and some even said he surpassed them. He had the training, having been taught by the best masters at arms in the Red Keep, including the fierce Sir Quentyn Ball, called Fireball. He had the looks, the charisma, and most importantly, he had that sword. But it wasn't just martial prowess that made Daemon dangerous. He had legitimate grievances and a claim that many people found compelling. His father had legitimized him on his deathbed along with all his other bastards, and rumors had circulated for years that King Daeron II, the man who actually inherited the throne, was not really Aegon's son at all, but rather the product of an affair between Queen Nyerys and her brother, the legendary Dragon Knight. Whether these rumors were true or not didn't really matter. What mattered was that people believed them, or at least wanted to believe them. Add to this the fact that Daeron II had made peace with Dorne, bringing them into the Seven Kingdoms through marriage, and you had a perfect storm of resentment. Many lords, especially those from the Reach and the Stormlands who had fought Dorne for generations, saw this as a betrayal. They looked at scholarly, diplomatic Daeron with his Dornish wife and Dornish-looking heir, and then they looked at Daemon, who embodied everything they thought a Targaryen king should be, and they made their choice. The First Blackfyre Rebellion erupted in 196 AC, and it wasn't some minor uprising. This was a civil war that quite literally split the realm in half. Now, it's true that none of the great houses officially declared for Daemon. The Arryns, Lannisters, Baratheons, Tullys, and Tyrells all supported King Daeron, but many of their vassals did not. Lords and knights from across the Seven Kingdoms flocked to Daemon's banner, and for over a year, the realm burned. Daemon proved to be not just a great warrior, but a capable military commander. He minted his own coins, administered his own territories, and led his forces with skill and determination. The rebellion culminated at the Battle of Redgrass Field in 196 AC, one of the bloodiest battles in Westerosi history. At Redgrass Field, Daemon Blackfyre proved why he was so feared. When the battle began, he led a charge so ferocious that it shattered the Targaryen vanguard. He came face to face with Sir Gawain Corbray of the King's Guard, who wielded the Valyrian steel blade Lady Forlorn. Their duel lasted nearly an hour, and despite Corbray being one of the greatest knights in the realm, Daemon defeated him, even showing mercy by ordering him carried from the field to prevent him from being trampled. This was Daemon at his peak, unstoppable in single combat, leading from the front, inspiring his men through sheer force of presence. But then came the moment that changed everything. Brynden Rivers, another of Aegon IV's bastard sons who had remained loyal to Daeron, had positioned his elite archers, the Raven's Teeth, on Weeping Ridge overlooking the battlefield. When Daemon's eldest son and heir, also named Aegon, was struck down by arrows, Daemon rushed to his aid. As he knelt beside his dying son, more arrows fell. 7 of them found Daemon, and the Black Dragon fell. When his twin son Aemon tried to take up Blackfyre, he too was killed. The rebellion collapsed, though Daemon's half-brother Aegor Rivers, called Bittersteel, managed to escape to the Free Cities with Blackfyre and Daemon's remaining sons. But here's what made Daemon Blackfyre truly dangerous. It wasn't just the rebellion he led, it was the legacy he created. His death didn't end the Blackfyre cause. For 5 generations, for over 60 years, his descendants and supporters would rise again and again, causing 5 separate rebellions. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Blackfyre rebellions would continue to plague the Targaryen kings, draining resources, causing death and destruction, and keeping the realm in a constant state of tension. It wasn't until Sir Barristan Selmy killed Maelys the Monstrous, the last male Blackfyre, during the War of the Ninepenny Kings, that the threat finally ended. Daemon Blackfyre's rebellion created a wound in the realm that took 5 generations to heal. That's a measure of how dangerous he was, not just in his lifetime, but in the legacy of chaos he left behind. Now let's turn our attention to the other Daemon, Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince. Born around 81 AC, this Daemon was the 2nd son of Prince Baelon Targaryen and Princess Alyssa Targaryen, making him the younger brother of King Viserys I. Unlike Daemon Blackfyre, this Daemon was legitimate. He was a trueborn prince of House Targaryen with a direct line to the throne. He claimed the dragon Caraxes, known as the Blood Worm, one of the most fearsome dragons of his age. He wielded Dark Sister, another ancestral Valyrian steel sword of House Targaryen, the sword that had once belonged to Visenya Targaryen. And just like Daemon Blackfyre, he was an extraordinary warrior, perhaps the most skilled and experienced of his entire generation. But what made Daemon Targaryen different was his nature, where Daemon Blackfyre was pushed into rebellion by circumstances and supporters who convinced him to claim the throne. Daemon Targaryen was naturally rebellious, unpredictable, and dangerous from the very beginning. He earned his nickname, the Rogue Prince, through years of scandalous behavior. He was appointed commander of the City Watch of King's Landing and transformed it into a formidable force loyal to him personally. He briefly served as Master of Laws and Master of Coins, but administrative roles didn't suit his temperament. His relationship with his brother Viserys was complicated, swinging between genuine affection and bitter rivalry. The breaking point came when Viserys' wife, Queen Aemma, died in childbirth along with their newborn son, Prince Baelon. On the very night of the baby's death, Daemon was found drunk in a brothel making jokes about the heir for a day. When this reached Viserys, the king was furious. He stripped Daemon of his positions and named his daughter Rhaenyra as heir instead, effectively removing Daemon from the line of succession. This is where Daemon Targaryen's danger truly becomes apparent. Rather than accept his diminished position, Daemon went into exile. But he didn't just sulk in some castle, he launched a military campaign in the Stepstones against the Triarchy, a coalition of the Free Cities. Over several years, he fought a brutal war, and when he finally won, he crowned himself King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. This wasn't rebellion in the traditional sense. He wasn't directly challenging Viserys for the Iron Throne, but he was establishing his own independent kingdom, proving that he didn't need his brother's approval to be a king. Eventually, he laid his crown at Viserys' feet, but the message was clear: Daemon Targaryen would not be contained or controlled. The real test of Daemon's danger came with the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war that erupted after King Viserys' death in 129 AC. By this time, Daemon had married his niece Rhaenyra Targaryen, the designated heir, making himself not just her husband, but her most important military commander and political advisor. When Viserys died and Rhaenyra's half-brother Aegon II seized the throne, Daemon was the one who placed the crown on Rhaenyra's head at Dragonstone and styled himself Protector of the Realm. What followed was one of the most devastating conflicts in Westerosi history, a war that would see the near extinction of dragons and the deaths of countless members of House Targaryen. Daemon's actions during the Dance of the Dragons revealed the full extent of his ruthlessness. When Rhaenyra's son Lucerys was killed by Aemon Targaryen at Storm's End, Daemon arranged for revenge in the most horrific way imaginable. He hired 2 assassins known as Blood and Cheese to infiltrate the Red Keep and murder a child of the royal family in retaliation. These assassins found Queen Helaena with her children and forced her to choose which of her sons would die. Young Prince Jaehaerys was then brutally murdered in front of his mother. This act, which became known as Blood and Cheese, was arguably one of the most heinous crimes committed during the entire Civil War. It showed that Daemon was willing to target innocent children to achieve his goals, that there were essentially no limits to what he would do. But Daemon was also a brilliant military strategist. He took Harrenhal early in the war, securing a strategic stronghold. He executed Sir Vaemond Velaryon with a single stroke when the man challenged the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's sons. Throughout the conflict, he demonstrated that he was not just a great warrior, but a man who understood power and how to wield it. His forces won significant victories, and his very presence on the battlefield, riding Caraxes and wielding Dark Sister, was enough to inspire his own troops and strike fear into his enemies. The end of Daemon Targaryen's story came at the Battle Above the God's Eye, one of the most legendary confrontations in Westerosi history. Daemon lured his nephew and rival Aemond Targaryen, who rode the massive dragon Vhagar, to single combat above the God's Eye Lake. In a suicidal but spectacular final act, Daemon leaped from Caraxes onto Vhagar's back and drove Dark Sister through Aemon's eye, killing him instantly. Both dragons, mortally wounded in their aerial battle, plunged into the lake below, taking both riders with them. Daemon's body was never recovered, leading some to speculate that he somehow survived, though most historians believe he died in that final, glorious moment of vengeance. Now, let's compare these 2 legendary figures directly. When we look at martial prowess, both men were extraordinary warriors. Daemon Blackfyre was described as unmatched with a sword, and his hour-long duel with Gwaine Corbray at Redgrass Field is legendary. Daemon Targaryen was equally skilled, described as the most experienced warrior of his time, and his combat record includes countless victories both in single combat and in larger battles. On this metric, they're essentially equal. Both were among the greatest fighters of their respective eras, and both wielded Valyrian steel blades that became extensions of themselves. But when it comes to military leadership and strategic thinking, Daemon Targaryen has a clear advantage. While Daemon Blackfyre led his forces competently during the First Blackfyre Rebellion and won several engagements, his military career was relatively short, lasting just over a year from the start of open warfare to his death at Redgrass Field. Daemon Targaryen, on the other hand, had decades of military experience. He fought for years in the Stepstones, learning how to command troops, manage logistics, and win a protracted campaign against determined enemies. During the Dance of the Dragons, he demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking, securing key strongholds like Harrenhal, coordinating with allies, and making decisions that had long-term strategic implications. His military acumen was proven over decades, not just months. When we consider political acumen and understanding of power, again, Daemon Targaryen shows himself to be more sophisticated. Daemon Blackfyre was in many ways a reluctant rebel. Historical accounts tell us that it took years for his supporters to convince him to actually claim the throne. He resented being a bastard and had legitimate grievances, but he wasn't naturally inclined toward political maneuvering. He was pushed into rebellion by counselors like his half-brother Bittersteel and Sir Quentyn Ball. Daemon Targaryen, conversely, was always playing political games. From his time as commander of the City Watch, where he built a power base loyal to him personally, to his self-crowning as king of the Stepstones, to his marriage to Rhaenyra, which positioned him as the de facto ruler behind the throne during her bid for power, Daemon understood how to accumulate and use power. He knew when to retreat, when to strike, and how to position himself for maximum advantage. The ruthlessness factor is where things get really interesting. Daemon Blackfyre was, by all accounts, a man with honor. Even in the heat of battle, when he defeated Gwaine Corbray, he showed mercy, ordering the knight removed from the field rather than finishing him off. He fought according to the codes of chivalry that he'd been taught. Daemon Targaryen had no such compunctions. The blood and cheese incident alone demonstrates a level of ruthlessness that Daemon Blackfyre never displayed. He ordered the murder of a child to send a message. Beyond that, his entire life was marked by actions that showed he would do whatever was necessary to achieve his goals. He likely had a hand in the death of his first wife, Rhea Royce, who died under suspicious circumstances. Many suspect he arranged the death of Laenor Velaryon to clear the way for his marriage to Rhaenyra. He executed Vaemon Velaryon without trial or mercy. Daemon Targaryen understood that power often requires getting your hands dirty, and he was more than willing to do so. Resources available to each rebel is another crucial comparison point. Daemon Blackfyre had significant support, no question about it. Many lords and knights joined his cause, enough that the realm was said to be split in half. He had his half-brother Bittersteel, one of the finest military commanders of the age. He had Sir Quentyn Ball, called Fireball, who terrorized the Westerlands. He had the symbolic power of Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings. But what he didn't have was any great house openly declaring for him. The Arryns, Lannisters, Tullys, Baratheons, and Tyrells all remained loyal to King Daeron II, which meant that the core power structure of the realm opposed him. Daemon Targaryen, fighting for Rhaenyra during the Dance of the Dragons, had something Blackfyre never had: dragons. Multiple dragons, in fact. He personally rode Caraxes, but the Blacks had several other dragons at their disposal. This gave them a weapon of mass destruction that could level castles and incinerate armies. Additionally, Rhaenyra had the explicit designation as heir from the late King Viserys, which gave their cause a legitimacy that Daemon Blackfyre's claim lacked. The legacy and lasting impact of their rebellions shows a fascinating contrast. Daemon Blackfyre's rebellion, while it failed during his lifetime, created a movement that lasted 5 generations. The Blackfyre pretenders continued to threaten Targaryen rule for over 60 years, causing 5 major rebellions and countless deaths. The wound Daemon Blackfyre inflicted on the realm festered for decades. In that sense, his danger extended far beyond his own life. Every time a Blackfyre rose in rebellion, it was Daemon's legacy at work. Daemon Targaryen's danger was more immediate and more catastrophic. The Dance of the Dragons was perhaps the most devastating conflict in Targaryen history. It resulted in the deaths of numerous dragons, reducing the Targaryens' greatest weapon to a shadow of its former strength. It killed multiple members of the royal family. It devastated the realm, causing famine, disease, and economic collapse. The Great Spring Sickness that followed the war killed countless more. But interestingly, Daemon's line actually won. His sons, Aegon III and later Viserys II, eventually became kings, meaning that all Targaryens who came after were descended from Daemon. In that sense, he achieved what Daemon Blackfyre never could. He put his bloodline on the throne. So now we come to the ultimate question. Which Daemon was more dangerous? To answer this, we need to define what we mean by dangerous. If we're measuring danger by immediate catastrophic impact, Daemon Targaryen wins hands down. The Dance of the Dragons was more devastating than the First Blackfyre Rebellion. More people died, more destruction was wrought, and the very foundation of Targaryen power, their dragons, was nearly destroyed. Daemon Targaryen fighting in a civil war where both sides had dragons created a level of devastation that the First Blackfyre Rebellion, fought primarily with conventional armies, simply couldn't match. The Battle of Redgrass Field was bloody, with 10,000 dead, but the Dance of the Dragons was a multi-year conflict with multiple catastrophic battles, sieges, and massacres. Moreover, Daemon Targaryen was personally more ruthless and willing to commit atrocities. Blood and cheese represents a level of moral darkness that we simply don't see from Daemon Blackfyre. While both men were willing to kill their enemies in battle, only Daemon Targaryen showed the willingness to deliberately target children and innocents as a terror tactic. This ruthlessness, combined with his military skill and access to dragons, made him extraordinarily dangerous during his lifetime. However, if we're measuring danger by the length and persistence of the threat, Daemon Blackfyre has a strong argument. His rebellion didn't just end with his death, it continued for 5 generations. The Blackfyre rebellions became a recurring nightmare for Targaryen kings. Every generation had to worry about whether this would be the year that the Blackfyres tried again. The second Blackfyre Rebellion, the third, the fourth, the fifth, they just kept coming. Daemon Blackfyre created a rival house, a competing claim, and a banner that malcontent and ambitious lords could rally behind for decades. That's a different kind of danger, not explosive and immediate like the Dance of the Dragons, but persistent and corrosive, constantly threatening to tear the realm apart. There's also the question of intent and circumstance. Daemon Blackfyre didn't want to be a rebel initially. He had to be convinced over many years to finally claim the throne. His rebellion was reactive, a response to grievances and perceived injustices. Daemon Targaryen, on the other hand, was proactive in his pursuit of power. He didn't wait for opportunities, he created them. He established his own kingdom in the Stepstones. He positioned himself as Rhaenyra's husband and military commander. When the succession was challenged, he didn't hesitate. He immediately moved to secure power through whatever means necessary. This proactive, ambitious nature made him dangerous even in times of peace, always pushing boundaries, always testing limits. From a purely military perspective, Daemon Targaryen's experience and success give him the edge. He won campaigns, he held territory, he demonstrated strategic thinking over decades. Daemon Blackfyre, while an extraordinary warrior, led a rebellion that lasted barely a year and ended in his death. Yes, he won several battles and engagements, but he ultimately lost the war. Daemon Targaryen, even though he died at the God's Eye, technically won his war. His side's candidate, or rather his son, eventually took the throne after Aegon II died. The Black's line continued while the Green's line ended. That's a significant difference, but perhaps the most compelling argument for Daemon Targaryen's greater danger lies in the nature of the conflicts themselves. The First Blackfyre Rebellion, for all its bloodshed, was a conventional civil war fought primarily with the traditional armies. It was terrible, but the realm had seen civil wars before and would see them again. The Dance of the Dragons was different. It was the first time dragons had been used in a Targaryen civil war, and the results were apocalyptic. Dragons fighting dragons created destruction on a scale that Westeros had never seen. Cities were burned. Entire armies were incinerated. The very weapon that had made the Targaryen supreme was turned against itself and nearly destroyed. Daemon Targaryen's willingness to unleash that level of destruction, to burn the realm, to secure power, represents a danger that transcends simple military threat. Let's consider their personalities as well. Daemon Blackfyre was, in many ways, everything people wanted in a king. He was handsome, charismatic, honorable, and a supreme warrior. People loved him because he embodied their ideals of kingship. His danger came from the fact that he was a rallying point, a symbol that could unite disparate factions against the Targaryens. But Daemon Targaryen was something else entirely. He was unpredictable, impulsive, ruthless, and willing to break any rule or taboo to get what he wanted. He married his niece in a scandalous union. He mocked his brother's dead son. He orchestrated the murder of a child. His danger came not just from his abilities, but from his willingness to do things that others wouldn't, to cross lines that others respected. That kind of moral flexibility, combined with extraordinary skill and resources, makes for an extremely dangerous individual. There's also the question of what each man ultimately wanted. Daemon Blackfyre wanted the throne because he believed it should be his. He felt he had a legitimate claim, that he was more worthy than Daemon II, and that his father had effectively designated him as heir by giving him Blackfyre. It was about personal legitimacy and perceived injustice. Daemon Targaryen's motivations were more complex. Yes, he wanted power, but he also seemed to genuinely enjoy chaos and disruption. He delighted in shocking people, in breaking rules, in doing the unexpected. He crowned himself king of a minor island chain not because he needed to, but because he could. This made him less predictable and therefore more dangerous, because you couldn't necessarily anticipate his actions based on rational self-interest alone. After examining every aspect, military prowess, strategic thinking, ruthlessness, resources, impact, legacy, and personality, the conclusion becomes clear. Daemon Targaryen was the more dangerous rebel. While Daemon Blackfyre's rebellion created a lasting legacy of conflict that plagued the realm for 5 generations, Daemon Targaryen's actions during the Dance of the Dragons caused more immediate devastation and fundamentally weakened House Targaryen in ways from which it never fully recovered. The near extinction of dragons, the deaths of so many Targaryens, the economic and social devastation of the war, these were wounds that cut deeper than even 5 Blackfyre rebellions. Moreover, Daemon Targaryen was dangerous in a way that extended beyond any single rebellion. Throughout his entire life, from his youth to his death, he was a source of chaos and disruption. His very presence destabilized situations. He couldn't be trusted to follow rules or norms. He would pursue what he wanted regardless of consequences. Daemon Blackfyre, by contrast, was dangerous specifically as a rebel, as a figure around which opposition to the Targaryens could coalesce. But before his rebellion, he had been relatively loyal, and after his death, while his cause continued, he personally was no longer a threat. The Dance of the Dragons also demonstrated something crucial, that internal Targaryen conflicts, when fought with dragons, were far more dangerous than external challenges or rebellions by non-dragon riders. Daemon Targaryen, with his dragon Caraxes, his Valyrian steel sword Darksister, his military experience, and his utter ruthlessness, represented the greatest threat the Targaryens had faced precisely because he was one of them. He understood their strengths and weaknesses. He had the same weapons they had. He knew how to hurt them in ways an outsider couldn't. In the end, both demons were extraordinarily dangerous men who left marks on history written in blood and fire. Both were exceptional warriors who inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. Both challenged the established order and plunged the realm into war. But when we measure danger not just by body count or years of conflict, but by the depth of the wound inflicted, by the fundamental damage done to the realm and to House Targaryen specifically, by the willingness to cross moral lines and commit atrocities, and by the sheer unpredictability and ruthlessness of the individual, Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, emerges as the more dangerous of these 2 legendary rebels. The First Blackfyre Rebellion split the realm and created a legacy of conflict, but the Dance of the Dragons nearly destroyed the Targaryen dynasty from within. That's the ultimate measure of danger, not just the ability to challenge power, but the ability to fundamentally undermine and potentially destroy it. And in that regard, no rebel in Targaryen history, not even the formidable Daemon Blackfyre, was more dangerous than Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince who rode Caraxes into legend and left the realm forever changed in his wake.